Welcome to Candid Crypto Season 2. Today we have our first guest, Jason Barraza. We're going to be talking about security tokens, the security token market, and really dig deep into this new class of cryptocurrency and understand what the security token market is.
And Jason couldn't be a better person to have as our first guest. He has a background in startups. He also has a financial background with Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. And for the past year and a half, he's been working at Security Token Market, also known as STM, and he's currently the head of growth and operations. Thank you, Jason, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. You guys are doing great stuff out here. This should be a very fun conversation.
You as well.
Yeah. So Jason, tell us about Security Token Market. What is it?
The company or the market itself?
Let's start with the company and then dig into the market itself.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so Security Token Market is essentially this company that just turned 3 years old a few months ago. And what we focus on are two things: data and media. We've noticed that the industry in security tokens is obviously somewhat nascent, and so we're trying to grow mass adoption through one media, which is the educational part. You know, we have the Security Token Show, which is our flagship product, if you will, on the media side. That kind of covers the industry news as to what is going on in security tokens, what security token offerings there are, and a little bit of the metaverse if you're interested in that section too. So a lot of the variety that covers in the Security Token Show. But we also have other shows. We have Spilling the NFT, which is fully women produced. We have Crypto con Leche, which is all Spanish. Open Tab, which my friend John interviews local Miami entrepreneurs. And there's written media, where we have data reports that are based off of the data, which I'll touch on in a second. And we have other reports, kind of like journalist style, where we kind of talk about, again, what's going on in the space and whatnot, but more written format. Now, on the data side of the business, we track, as soon as you sign on to stmmarket.com, lies out essentially basically like a leaderboard style dashboard, if you will. And so what you'll see is all the pricing for all these security tokens that are trading worldwide in the secondary markets. And we have that data through API integration with all these exchanges worldwide. And so we're the one-stop shop where you can really just see all of them instead of having to sign into 15 different exchanges and whatnot. So we have all of them. You can see the trading data. If you wanted to invest in one, you could potentially have a link to maybe say the white paper or a pitch deck or something, or see who the management team is. And if you want to invest in it, it redirects you over to the appropriate exchange or ATS. And from that data, we sell some of it, right? We sell some of like the access to the data, or we sell data reports that we make with our analysts that kind of talk about what is going on in the market, interpreting that data for potential, opportunities. The biggest of which is the real estate report. And the second is, or which probably should be the biggest one and probably will be soon, is the arbitrage report. We've seen that maybe you can, and people love the arbitrage report, right? Because obviously, who doesn't want some free money, right? So risk-free money. Yeah. So that's pretty much what STM does in a nutshell. A little bit of data, a little bit of media, and overall goal is to cover what the security token market has to do.
It's super interesting. And your content is extremely high quality. And I love how you go into different, areas with your podcast, Crypto con Leche, completely Spanish. And then also the one where one of your coworkers is behind the bar just talking to different entrepreneurs in the space.
Open Tab, yeah. I think
it's a lot
really
of fun.
Cool concept.
It's a lot of fun to watch, and we'll definitely link all your content in the show notes so our listeners can access it. Thank you talked about STM. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about security tokens in general? We've never really covered this topic on the show, and security token offerings and security tokens are very new to a lot of our listeners. So please educate us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Security tokens, I mean, they're a little hard to come by just because they're, unlike crypto, they're growing at a slower rate as far as adoption is concerned. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. But essentially what security token is essentially a digital wrapper over a real world asset, right? A digital representation of a real world asset, like such an investment. So for example, if you were to invest in a company, great, you have your analog shares. But if you were to tokenize it, now it runs on the blockchain. It still represents that same ownership in the company, but because it runs on the blockchain, you can fractionalize it. So now you can, you can raise money a little easier from the crowd. And I think something that's very important to touch on is democratization of the capital markets. Traditionally with pre-IPO shares where private companies are raising money, traditionally you're going to do it from ultra high net worth individuals, or you're going to do it through a broker dealer. Either way, you're going to limit the amount of people you can reach. Whereas if you have a startup or a business that simply wants to raise money for X or Y reason, and they have a huge following or have a great marketing strategy, and they want it to raise from the masses, kind of like a Kickstarter model, if you will, like a crowdfund. Now you can do it with a smaller ticket rather than minimum investment of $25,000. Now it could be $100, a lot more affordable for the average Joe to be able to pitch in and invest in the earlier rounds, and then before it goes public and then explodes, right? And so security tokens essentially are that. They're kind of like a marriage of crypto and traditional finance, where you can have the benefits of crypto but still be doing it compliantly through the SEC regulations and exemptions put in place that have been in there for decades. So a little bit of both.
So what are the most common security tokens? What do they represent?
I would say I think they represent equity, just because it's the easiest to be able to structure, if you will, and the easiest for people to understand. People are raising money to start up their venture, or they simply already have a venture where they already have investors and they simply want to fractionalize those shares. Typically, it would be equity, but we've seen all of it. We've seen some debt structures. We've seen revenue share. I think there's one out there where you can complicate it, right? Because as you guys know, the blockchain is able to use smart contracts to be able to programmatically distribute dividends and whatnot. So what happens is you can get very, very creative with the smart contract because it'll automatically execute anything you tell it to. So there's a company out there that has a security token where I believe the conditions are, you don't get dividends unless you have 40% profits of that year. Otherwise it doesn't execute. And the profits come from like net operations or something like that. So it gets complicated and goes into the financials, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. Like you can really get it so that it's both attractive for the issuer and for the investor. So that's something we've seen growing in this space as well.
Very interesting. And issuing a security token is different than creating an NFT or a cryptocurrency. There's more regulation and compliance to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, our sister company, Security Token Advisors, which I also work at, it kind of helps through that. We're a consulting company essentially over at STA. And essentially we walk you through the whole process. Essentially what you're going to end up doing is first figuring out the structure of the token. What's that smart contract going to be doing based on what the financial instrument is, right? Or what the financial model is of this offering, right? And so once you have that ready, okay, now you have to go to your lawyers and be like, okay, maybe I need to set up a subscription agreement or an operating agreement, right? Or a private placement memorandum. So we help you connect you with the right lawyers. Then we move on to the issuance platform. Great. Now we have the legal papers done so that we're still SEC compliant using certain regulations, such as the most famous one in regulation crowdfunding, as I just mentioned, where you get to raise from the crowd. Now you move on to the issuance platform, build it out, host it, get it done. Okay, great. You raised your money. Now we have to get you onto secondary. You're not going to list on the NASDAQ because you're not a public company. So we have alternative trading systems, or ATSs, such as the T0s or the Securitizers of the world, to name a couple examples. And so from there, we kind of help you also find liquidity strategies, right? I love to preach about security tokens. It's freaking amazing, and it really is great. But at the same time, there's always that question, like, what is the liquidity here? What's it look like? And I'm like, okay, well, we kind of help you figure out, okay, obviously these are not going to be trading as liquid as Apple stock is, but we're going to be able to help you either do automatic market makers or issuer-based market making, right, through a treasury program or whatnot. So we kind of help figure that out as well. But yeah, to answer your question, it's not as easy, I would say, as a cryptocurrency or an NFT to make, because there's a lot more regulation involved. But I think it's still worthwhile doing every single one of those steps because the benefits are fantastic in tokenizing any business or any asset for that matter.
So Jason, my mind naturally drifts to the technical aspects of security tokens. I work as a developer as my day job, and I'm familiar with blockchain and smart contract development. What is the go-to blockchain for security tokens? Are there multiple blockchains that these operate on? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, obviously it has to be smart contract compatible. I'm not a full expert on the blockchains themselves, so we kind of had our head of research, Peter over at STA, that kind of dives in a little more on that end. But what I do know is that some of the go-to ones will probably be Ethereum, as we know is probably one of the most adopted. Avalanche does a great job at that as well, and so those are probably two that I know off the top of my head that we would probably tokenize on. Ravencoin is starting to dive into tokenization as well. They have a huge follower community. Look out for them. And yeah, those are some of the more prominent ones that I've heard of.
Doing research, Liam, I think one of the largest security tokens, they transferred most of their liquidity from Ethereum to Polygon. And that's a Negra. Yeah, Negra Group.
Yeah, they did do that. Yeah, and they're actually number 1 on our leaderboard right now.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. And they have a huge market cap. It seems like the majority of the security token market cap is with Negra.
Yeah. As soon as they listed on STMmarket.com, the total market cap skyrocketed, right? We started the year with $1 billion in market cap, which was a great milestone that we hit late last year. And then now we're at what, 19-20 billion. So it's crazy. It's just like, wow, like great growth over a span of months. And it's just it kind of attests to, granted, like in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the total market cap of the world or the stock market, granted, okay, $1 billion, 20 billion, so it's still relatively small, but relative to the security token market, it's like, okay, good growth. We're seeing adoption coming through. And what we like to say too on that note is actually that the assets and the value are already there. Like you don't have to raise money and create a new company. Like all you have to do to make that market cap grow is take an asset that already exists, such as a house, a commercial building or whatever, put it on the digital rails, as we like to call it, or tokenize it. All of a sudden, now it's tokenized. It represents the same equity that the shares would have of that same asset. And therefore, the market cap of security tokens does go up. So the value is already there. You don't have to create it. All you have to do is transfer it over to blockchain.
Interesting. Yeah, and speaking of kind of tokenized stocks, why would, I mean, what's really the main benefit of tokenizing a stock where you can just already go to Robinhood or, any broker and buy the stock?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is simply the fact 24/7 trading. The fact that you can trade 24/7 anytime, you're not limited by the market hours, right? So you could be at 8 p.m. and like, oh my gosh, like something happened. You don't have to wait until the next day, or Friday at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. something happens in the news about XY company. Great. You can't do anything about it until Monday, right? And by then what happens is like you have all these other things going on and whatnot, you have movement, whereas you can act on it with 24/7 if it was a tokenized stock. And that's kind of what we're seeing with the ones down at the bottom half of our screen of STMmarket.com. You have tokenized Netflix, you have tokenized Tesla, Coinbase, Apple, a lot of these very well-known names.
So tell me, when it comes to tokenized stocks, are you guys competing with a service like FTX, or are you really acting as an aggregate to really like bring together all the data from separate marketplaces into a one-stop shop?
I would say it's the latter. We're not necessarily competing with FTX, where we like to talk to them and whatnot, and they're great people, and they're a little more crypto focused rather than security tokens. But yeah, I mean, we're essentially just a leaderboard and a one-stop shop where you can just see everything that's going on in the market. And we have the data. And we like to say we're the most whole set of what's going on because we're the ones linked up to all these exchanges, right? Where else are you going to find it? Like CoinMarketCap is fantastic and they're a great data source, but they don't have all the security token data going on, right? And so that's kind of like our niche, our thing, and this is what we understand. And so we kind of just preach it and make sense out of all that data too. Now, granted, for plans moving forward, well, I can't disclose too much, but you will see, hopefully, within the next few months, what comes out of STM.
But right now, you're not an exchange. You're just an aggregator of the data.
Correct.
And you can see, all the exchanges on the website, spanning from T0 to Crypto SX, and then looks like a lot of the tokenized stocks are from like FTX and Binance.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you wanted to invest in any of these, you just hit the button and it redirects you to whoever exchange or ETS you need to invest with.
You'll make it easy. Love it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to launching a STO, what's the process like, and why might somebody choose an STO over traditional fundraising mechanisms?
Sure. Yeah. Let's start with the process, and then I guess we can dive into why someone wants to do this. So the process, touched on it a little bit earlier, but essentially first is structuring. How do you want this token to look like? What's the structure going to be? What's it going to offer? What are the terms going to be? And then you go to legal and make sure you cross off the boxes, and make sure you sign the right forms. And so I'll go through 4 different regulation and exemptions that we kind of follow to make sure it's compliant. Especially when you're dealing with the private markets. The first of which is Regulation CF, as we talked about earlier, crowdfunding. You can essentially, all it says is that you can raise money from anyone in the US or international. They don't have to be accredited, which for those listening and don't know, accredited simply means you either have a net worth of $1 million, excluding your primary residence, or you have a $200,000 income per year for a minimum 2 years, right? And so essentially the wealthy. And so, and so for the retail, to be able to raise from retail, you have Regulation CF, which essentially says, okay, go ahead and raise money, but there are limits. You have to file a Form C, you have to review your financials, and recently they changed actually the limit from 1.07 million to $5 million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that you can raise, because there was a lot of concerns that $1 million for a startup, it's like, great, it's a lot of money, but after costs and whatnot, may not go as far. And so you really need a little more help to be able to really propel your startup. And so that's why 5 million was brought up. And Herwig, actually one of the CEOs, was actually directly cited by the SEC as to why they chose to raise that limit from 1.07 to 5 million. So that's something we like to brag about a little bit, if you will. But yeah, so that's Reg CF. You're limited to 5 million a year. Next one is Regulation 8, which is the other end of the spectrum on the private market side, which is essentially what we call a mini IPO. It has a lot of documentation going. It's probably the most complicated of processes. It's so complicated that we call it, like I just said, the mini IPO, right? You might as well just IPO. Now, and it has like a $75 million, a lot higher, obviously, of a limit. Now, in the middle, you have the easier ones. You have Regulation D, which all you have to do is file a Form D and a couple other things, and you can now raise from accredited investors, right? And then you have Regulation S, which means you just file it. And remember, the SEC doesn't really care too much about who you raise from that's international. They care about protecting the American investor, right? And so when you file a Regulations S, great, now you can raise from any international person, and you can raise, unlimited amount and whatnot. So it's a lot more flexible. So those are the 4 that we kind of go through with legal. We choose which one or which combination you want to do. If in case you want to do, maybe you can do a Reg D and a Reg S, pair it up. You do Reg D to raise from accredited US investors, and a Reg S part to raise from international investors. And now you can like get a little funky with it and see what possibilities are going to fit whatever your goals are as an issuer. Right. So yeah, continuing on with the process, we figure out legal, great. We go to the smart contract builders, if you will, developers, make sure that they can do it. Go to an issuance platform. If you're doing a crowdfund, you have to go specifically to a crowdfunding portal to be able to accept payment. Then we go to marketing, make sure you have everything in the audience needed, which is something that STM helps with. If you want to market your security token offering, we have the most eyeballs of security token aficionados, as we like to call them, that want to invest in security tokens. So we have advertising on our website. We have advertising on our shows. We talk about it. We do a press release through our Medium or our blog and whatnot. So there's a lot of different things that we offer there for our STA clients once they're ready, and for external clients that want to work with us, to be able to pump out those STOs. So hopefully it goes well. Fantastic. We raise the money. You close your round. Great. Next step. Now you need to be able to, exchange these tokens, right? And so we go with exchanges or ATSs based on jurisdiction, based on where your investors are, all these things. You can do multiple ATSs if you wanted to dual list. And then finally, liquidity strategies, which I mentioned before, which is really just to be able to make sure that people can trade these tokens. And whatnot. So that's the process. And your other question was, remind me, why would they tokenize?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So a couple different things. I think one of the biggest ones is early liquidity. A lot of these companies, or a lot of these people that are raising money, say for real estate, for example, it's like, okay, maybe they pull their money in and they go in on, say, a club that, or maybe a restaurant or a chain or whatever the case is, right? It's all private money. So for them to liquidate their position is a little hard, right? They're going to have to find a buyer that's willing to put in $1 million or whatever the case is, fill out a bunch of forms. It's complicated, you know, get your financials straight and whatnot. If you were to tokenize, you do that from the very beginning, right? And so now that it's on the digital rails, you can fractionalize it. Now you don't have to liquidate a huge portion if you don't want to. You can select, hey, I just want to do maybe 25% of my position in, say, this strip mall, and I want to liquidate it now. I'll just put it in the exchange, someone else can buy it. And I just need this cash to maybe move on and make another investment. Great. So that's something that fractionalization and tokenization helps do. The other one would probably be to raise money in the first place. So if you, again, like I mentioned before, if you have a huge following or you're good at marketing and you have something going on, why not be able to make that crowd part of your company? Let them and let your users be investors in your company. That creates brand loyalty. It gives them a reason to come back, right? Because now they're part owners and what's going on here, and whatnot. And so yeah, it creates that less friction between, like, you know, consumer and company. It's more like investor and issuer, right? And it's a little more close knit, if you will. So that's another one, and it all varies business to business. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it kind of seems like it's an enhanced NFT. I know a lot of people over the past year or two, artists, are using NFTs to raise money for certain projects. But I mean, it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to NFTs, where STOs and security tokens, there's just, you know, they're compliant with security laws and like money laundering. So I feel like as an investor, I would feel a little bit more secure about where I'm putting my money.
100%. Yeah.
And it seems like you can do more with real estate as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, you know, we like to say that NFTs or security tokens are adult NFTs, if you will. And so, because that's what they are. It's just a little more granular. It's a little more, obviously fungible. And you can do a lot more presentation with it. With NFTs, I think I like it a lot too. It's a great concept. But it goes beyond the JPEGs. I think the JPEGs the $1 million JPEGs are a great way for people to get hyped about them and hop on and start learning about, you know, what is a blockchain and what is the technology behind an NFT. I think in 5 years with NFTs, the true use for that is because it represents ownership in a one thing where it's non-fungible. Maybe the use case there is to maybe NFT a house, right? If you were to NFT your house, think about how you would sell your house once you're ready to move and whatnot. Now you don't have to go through all these like financials and like look at all these paperwork and the rating on your house and all this inspections. It's all on chain. So now when I find a different buyer, I just sell them the NFT, which comes with the deed with the house. All of a sudden they're the new owner. Great. Wham bam, thank you, man. We're good to go. And it's a lot cheaper and a lot less of a headache. So I think that's the future of NFTs. You can NFT anything that's really a unique asset, right? You can NFT insurance, your insurance policy, you know, right? Just the fact that your name is different than my name right there is a differentiator, making it very unique of an asset. And so NFTs are here to stay, I think, but it's going to take some time to change them, or change the adoption of them. Whereas with security tokens, we kind of try to focus from the very beginning as to like, here's what it's meant for. You know, here's yeah, go ahead.
In the same line of thinking, what do you think is the future really for security tokens? Because clearly you and your colleagues are very bullish on the space and see that it's going to increase significantly. What do you really think is going to be the quote unquote killer app in the ecosystem?
The killer app, like application, or
let me rephrase, as in what is really going to be what is really going to send this to the next level? Like, what kind of trends do you see emerging?
Yeah, what's going to send security tokens to the moon, essentially?
Yes.
I think it's two things that we're waiting on, or at least are going to be like the straw that broke camel's back, essentially. One is going to be adoption from the incumbents, such as banks, and the other one is going to be adoption and regulation being a little more clear, right? Because so I'll start with the regulation. With regulation, we see that even though security tokens are following securities laws, which is great, we love that, we love compliance. There are certain areas where like compliance is not clear. For example, when you're talking about a custodian or a broker dealer who's allowed to carry these digital assets for the issuer, because those are needed through through compliance and regulation. Who qualifies? Who is a qualified broker dealer? That definition is very clear for traditional markets, but when it comes to digital assets that deal with the blockchain, that's where it starts getting a little unclear. And the SEC, so the SEC is being nice about it, and they have declared, maybe like a little leniency for some broker dealers that have to fit a very specific set of rules, and that's nice. They're like, okay, go ahead, just make sure you follow these rules, and that's a great start. But I think once the clarity is full on ready and the regulation is fully passed and everyone knows exactly who you're allowed to work with and what you're allowed to do and not, that's a part that's really going to move over and shift all these companies to start tokenizing their assets, because I think they see the value. They just don't, maybe they're just scared of adoption because of this regulatory scrutiny and fear. And I think crypto in general has a bad stigma when it comes to it, as we saw with the ICO era back in 2017.
Oh yeah.
And so, that's the reason why security tokens became a thing, right? Because of the ICO era, because now we realize, no, we have to do this compliantly. But not the next step is
kind of in the middle of ICOs and IPOs.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Closer to the IPO section, I will say though. Yeah, but so I think that's one of them, to answer your question. And the second would be incumbents. Now that banks are starting to explore blockchain, we see Bank of America with Paxos. I know JP Morgan has their own private blockchain that they're working on, as Jamie Dimon kind of alluded to in one of his shareholder letters. So the fact that they're exploring it, obviously no surprise that none of them want to fall back. But I think that there's still a little bit left, right? Because you can raise from the crowd and it's great, and you can raise from private investors and it's great, but sometimes banks are really what kind of drive economy, right? And so when you are able to get a bank on rails as well, or get a lend from them or whatnot, great. Now that makes adoption a little easier to digest, right? And so because they're playing with it, I think we're headed in a very good direction. But I think that they're all kind of looking at each other like, okay, who's going to move first? Who's going to make the first move? But as soon as one or two banks make it, I think, and it really fully adopts it, I think everyone's just going to pile on and be like, okay, cool, now we're all good to go, right? So I think they're all a little scared to do it, but I think those are the two things: regulation clarity and incumbent adoption, that are going to make security tokens now be fully accepted. And if I had to put a timeline on it, I would honestly say anywhere from the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully closer to 5. But we are seeing that. But we are seeing, even just in the last few years, that security tokens are growing in a very fast pace, right? And so I have a good feeling that it'll be closer to the next 5.
Yeah, I mean, even 4 months ago, being under $1 billion, and now it's closer to 20. That seems like there's some adoption happening.
Exactly, and it's worldwide. It's not just us. There's other jurisdictions other than the U.S. that are adopting it. Some of them are nicer, some of them are not as nice on the regulations. So a lot of it really becomes interesting as to who you can work with, who you cannot work with. It's like, oh my gosh, I have access to this. Oh, I don't have access to that, investment and whatnot. So it's like, why? And so we start looking at those regulations, and it kind of helps so that some governments can kind of look at what other governments are doing and maybe use that as proof of concept. So time will tell.
Certainly. Yeah. And that resonates with me because, what crypto has done that's been very tangible for me is I was able to take out loans against my cryptocurrency at a much more competitive rate than, I would get as someone who had just, come out of college and, had a 25% APY credit card. It feels like what the crypto space is doing in general for the average person is allowing them to access financial instruments that they were shut out of in, the centralized finance ecosystem. And so I really like the notion of democratizing and bringing, these very bite-sized sort of investment vehicles, or, the ability to really put your money where your mouth is in, say, a small scale. Like, it's very cool that is opening up and becoming more and more mainstream and acceptable with our regulators. So I like that. Yeah. So when it comes to, say, the average person who's going on to STM, what kind of resources or tools do you provide for people who are interested in investing in these things?
Absolutely. So I think the first of all is really the education around what these even are. right? And so that's kind of where we dive into some of the written media that we produce on our blog, and we cover anywhere from like the basics as to, you know, what is blockchain, what is a token, to real world examples like, hey, today we're covering this token and here's what it is and why it matters and whatnot. And then from there, they're able to see on STM, like, you know, from the blog, move over and read that blog on the security token. Now you can move over to the dashboard, if you will, and look at its trading data. Check it out. You have access to their and part of the tools are having access to their white paper, like what's going on with that company. And if you so choose to invest, then you can. You know, we directly link you right to the appropriate site. So that's one of them. The other one is like the other media channels, such as like the YouTube, where we provide more education on there. That's more visual for those that like to see video. I'm personally absorb a little more visually than I do reading. This is my preferred method. So we have that through the different shows, and it's still entertaining and it's a good time, and whatnot. And then there will be a lot more tools that roll out in the next few months that I can't talk about right now, but a few more tools that will definitely be helpful in educating, one, and two, being able to do more stuff with the data.
Super cool. Liam, I don't know how you feel, but I really appreciate Jason taking us all the way down the rabbit hole when it comes to STM and STOs and security tokens in general. I know I would love to hear more, and I know our listeners would probably like to hear more about Jason's kind of personal background and how he got into crypto. Should we kind of move towards that direction?
Absolutely. Jason, why did you get involved in crypto in the first place? What was your inception here?
Absolutely. So the very, very beginning of crypto was back in 2017. It was my freshman year of college. I was having lunch with this guy, and he was like, "Hey, look, dude, look at this. Look at Bitcoin. It's growing so fast. Like, you should probably hop on." I'm like, dude, like, what is this? You know, like I back in the day, I was like, oh my god, what's crypto? Like, I'm too busy to pay attention to this, whatever. So I was like, screw it. Just so he shuts up, I'm just gonna like throw in $20, see what happens or whatever. I don't know how much it was, but like it was a very small amount. And around that time, Bitcoin was trading at like 19,000. He's like, look, next week it's gonna go even higher. I'm like, sure, I'll liquidate then. I'll take my gain, see what's up. And then it didn't go back up. It went down. And so I sat on my Bitcoin at $3,000, and I'm like, oh, how fantastic, you know. I knew I mean, it's a good thing I didn't put my freaking life savings on it. But yeah, that's kind of what happened there. So that was my first experience with crypto. I was like, okay, well, it tanked. But I just held it, you know, I'm like, all right, cool, see what's out, see what happens. And then at that time, that's kind of around the time when I met Kyle, and we started talking about his company and what he was doing with security token market back when he was starting it. And I was like, okay, I understand blockchain. I don't know about crypto, but we'll dabble. Fast forward a few, I kept up with it a little bit, kind of read and listened to the podcast, the security token show. Back then it was voice only, no video, no nothing. But I was like, all right, cool. And then, yeah, no, I eventually just started like reconnecting with Kyle, and I was like, okay, how can I help? How can I reconnect? And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I knew nothing about security. I knew a little bit about blockchain, but not really. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I started just helping with the social media posts, and I started helping a little bit about the like segmenting some like stuff for some videos and clipping video interviews for some clients. Very, very small stuff. But through that, I started listening to these interviews, and I started listening to these clips of the security token show that I would post for social media purposes. And through that, I was like, okay, now I'm picking up as to like who the industry players are, who the names are, you know, what the benefits are, all this stuff that they would talk about. I'm like, perfect. Now I'm listening through it. I'm kind of forced to through work. But it's, you just kind of fall through a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden he gave me a book called Digital Finance by Baxter Hines. Read through that, and it's a nice, in a nutshell, what security tokens are. So yeah, that's kind of my journey as to how I got into crypto and security tokens by proxy.
You've had quite the come up. You're now the head of growth and operations. That's a pretty impressive title.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we're trying our best out here. We're all, it's a very aggressive team, as we like to say. You know, we like to work together. We're always grinding. We help each other. We're very supportive. I think it's one of those cultures where, like, yeah, we all have our titles, but at the same time, we all wear different hats. We help each other in whatever's needed. We are a young company, but thankfully we are growing fast. You know, last year we started with 4 people, and now we're at 25. So I'm like, all right, great. It's coming up.
You're doing your job. Good job.
Now I got to grow people onto the website a little more. Yeah, but It's all been going well, thankfully.
Yeah, well, I could definitely relate. I myself work at a software startup, and you definitely have to wear all the hats. There's a lot of cross team and just knowledge bases that you have to cover all your bases when you're working at a startup or a small company. So how did your kind of traditional finance experience at BOA translate over to what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think working at Bank of America, I mean, the first 6 months that I was there, so which is pretty much the whole time I was there, aside from my internship previous to that, was really just getting my Series 7 and my SIE, my Series 66 licenses for wealth management. Other than that, we weren't really doing much. But through getting those licenses, I learned a lot about the traditional financial markets and really just the industry and how it's shaped, right? Like, what is a custodian? What's a transfer agent? What's needed under securities law for all these different things? And at the same time, I was kind of helping out still a little bit at STM, and then at the time I started kind of dabbling in the advisory side. So that kind of helped me really jumpstart my education and jumpstart my ability to now help clients and be like, okay, well, at least I know the regulation part. So like now I can help you get with the right people, and I can, now that I know how it's structured, I can now just tie in the right people, the right companies, and name drops to per section and category of the process. So that's kind of how B of A helped majority. And during the internship, it was remote back in COVID time, so all I was really doing is sourcing on LinkedIn different potential clients for my higher ups, and I was like, okay, here's a list of like leads, if you will. But it also did help me, learn how do I scope out a proper lead for a proper, goal right now, a gold client, if you will. So it helped with that too. And now I can scope out some leads for both the ESTA and STM side. On LinkedIn and whatnot. So it's always good. And professionalism is always great, right? Obviously, etiquette,
Yeah,
being able to
absolutely.
carry yourself and whatnot, and really understanding the difference between corporate America and startup world. I think that's one of the biggest benefits, actually, because you start appreciating the flexibility you have in startup world, where you kind of get to take charge and be a leader and not go through so much scrutiny like X, Y, and Z person has to approve it and whatnot. But at the same time, you do appreciate corporate America, where it's more structured and you know what you're going to be doing and you have a desired outcome and all this stuff. And so a little bit of both. I think it kind of gave me more perspective, and it kind of grew me as an adult fast after college, and to be able to experience both.
Certainly. And I'm sure you recognized both the strengths and the inefficiencies that came with the traditional finance, ecosystem, and were able to intelligently posture STM now in a way that works around those.
Yeah, it helps a lot, especially on the operational side. To be able to, now that we're growing and we grew from those 4 to 25 people, now it's like, yeah, you're absolutely right. How do I take some of those structures from corporate America into this, structure of a startup, and to make sure we're efficient as possible on what we do, so things don't fall through the cracks. I'll make sure all our clients are serviced and whatnot, and we still grow as well. So it definitely.
Can you elaborate more on your role of, what
Yeah.
does the head of growth and operations actually do?
Yeah, it's two. I guess it's 2 in 1, if you will. The operational side is a little more internal. I kind of just make sure that we are structured in a way where we understand, like, okay, for this process, let's say we're producing a show, right? What goes into that? We have audio engineering, we have the camera crew, we have editing, we have now we have, that's our production team, right? And then we have to transfer it over to our communications team to make sure that we have the right copy for the social media. We schedule it. We have people doing this, and this, and we have to clip parts of the show so that we upload them to different, on the reels and TikToks, if you will, so that, those are a little separated, and a little separated of a format rather than the long tail or the longer format, right, on YouTube, right? So getting through that through communications and finally pump it out to the public, right? And that's just on the video production side. Then you have different operations where it gets a little more complicated when it comes to the advisory side. Now you have to talk about, like, okay, we're going to service X client, we have to do X, Y, and Z, communicate with this lawyer, but don't forget about that client that has to do this, right? And so keeping it all in a CRR, if you will, like a project management system, if you will, is kind of like what my job has been so far, really just making sure that we optimize all these processes. So again, like I said, nothing falls through the cracks. Now on the growth side, it's more about, how do we get more people onto our website? How do we get them to stay longer? How do we get, because that obviously drives the value of our site on one end and prepares us for what's coming in a few months. And then on the flip side, on the media side, and it's great for the data as well, right? And then for the media side, it's how do we get more views? How do we get more engagement on our socials? How do we get more presence known so that we are, remember, our goal is to drive this adoption. So how do we get more eyeballs on our stuff so people start learning about what's going on here? So that's kind of like the growth side aside, and then finding other partnerships with other industry players as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that breakdown. And you obviously are a very experienced and talented individual. Do you have any advice to our listeners who are trying to break into the crypto space, either just, you know, educational on and on their like personal side of things, but even someone trying to break in professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, I think it's people, you'll hear it left and right, but and networking is huge. I think networking is huge, but not just for, obviously it's great for meeting people that are going to introduce you to new opportunities that may arise through meeting the right person and whatnot. But I think it also helps simply just to learn how to express yourself, how to be more confident and explain what you do, who you are, what your goals are. Because the more you talk about yourself, the more you experience learning about different people's cultures, different people's backgrounds, different people obviously interact in very different ways. You know, some people are a little more excited and whatnot, and other people are a little more timid, right? And adopting to those different cultures and those different, you know, speaking mannerisms and whatnot kind of helps you really be an adaptable person, agile. And so when you go to do business, it's like, okay, now that you have experience adopting to these people and you're going to talk to a client, it doesn't matter what kind of client they are, you're able to talk to them or get through the conversation or create some kind of banter, whatever the case is, right? But so I would say networking is huge. I think networking is huge simply because it's on a personal development, but also career growth. Obviously, you can meet you know, potential opportunity there. On the crypto side, I would say really just try to watch some YouTube videos. Obviously, I'm getting a little biased and say watch our content if it was security token specific, but crypto in general. Obviously, you know, listen to Candid Crypto, right? You guys are breaking down the basics in the first season, right? And so this is fantastic, you know, stuff. And there's a lot of content going out nowadays. So I would say educate yourself through these different mediums, whether you're a visual learner or a more audio learner or reader. There's content of all formats out there. But yeah, those are the two I would say.
So speaking of networking, we glossed on this a bit prior to recording this episode, but you and your team are based out of Miami. Do you feel that Miami is a good place to network and get in the know when it comes to the crypto scene?
110%. I think, and obviously I'm biased, but because I live here, but you know, I think it's pretty much well known at this point that Miami is the crypto capital of the world, right? It's now at the point where, you know, the mayor has been very, very open to crypto. You know, that famous "How can I help" tweet, and now San Francisco, New York, everyone's flying and moving down to Miami, right? And now it's more, it's even more entrepreneurial than ever. People are starting businesses here. Big businesses are moving down here as well. When you go to events, you know, and I'm about to go to one after this, you go out, show up, you start networking, start talking. People are very receptive. People are nice. They want to meet you. They want to help you. They want to find ways to collaborate. So I think Miami is a great city to do that, especially in crypto. I don't know if you guys saw, but the Bitcoin 2022 conference that just happened a couple of weeks ago, they unveiled the crypto bowl. And I'm like, finally, like we have our own bowl and it's not just New York. And it even has laser eyes. So I actually have the pleasure of passing by it every time I go to the gym every morning. So it's just so much fun. But yeah, we essentially have like something tangible that kind of just establishes Miami as like one of those crypto capitals.
Fantastic. So Jason, if people want to keep up with you or STM, what is the best way for them to reach out, stay in the know, and keep up with you and your team's content?
100%. I would say first and foremost, follow our Twitter. I think my tech in general just really is very active on Twitter. And so, you know, my personal handle is at Jason_Barraza, Barraza. STM is, you know, at STO Market. So make sure to follow those. And it's the same for Instagram, actually. And the other way is really to, you know, if you guys just want to watch our content, follow us on YouTube, Security Token Market. Our YouTube channel has a variety, it has all the shows on there, so you can kind of just filter by playlist, and different interviews with industry players too. So you'll see a variety of content on there.
Right on. Well,
Excellent.
Jason, yeah.
Wait, Liam, I know we're wrapping up, but I would be very disappointed if we didn't get to ask Jason about his podcast that he has going on, Crypto Con Leche. I mean, Candid Crypto is all about accessibility, and I just find your podcast really amazing. Can you kind of talk about it a little bit and kind of what makes it unique?
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Crypto Con Leche is another one of the shows that's hosted by Security Token Market, but essentially the story behind it is that we're in Miami, where 70% of the population speaks Spanish. Why do we not have a single thing going out in Spanish and educating the Spanish speaking population? And not to mention, obviously, we're kind of like the I guess the touch point between the US and Latin America, and it's like perfect. So we started Crypto Con Leche, an all new only Spanish show that kind of educates on the first season being focused around the basics of crypto, the basics of NFTs, and obviously ending with security tokens. And our second season is going to be focused a little more on industry players, on interviews, touching up on those previous topics and going even more in depth. Now that they have the basics down, we can go touch on a little more profoundly. So yeah, it's all in Spanish, and our goal is to be able to reach Latin America and anyone Spanish speaking in the US, because I think because the mission of the blockchain and fractionalization and tokenization is to democratize these capital markets. Well, we can't really do that unless they understand what's going on. And so that's why we created it. We're happy to do it, and it's very exciting. It's a fun time. Michael, and Liam, I really appreciate you guys letting me plug it in. I think it's very helpful for everyone.
I find it fantastic.
Thank you. And
I'm going to learn Spanish through you.
Exactly. Just turn on the subtitles, see what words catch on, and eventually it's like Duolingo. You'll catch on to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was actually going to plug in one last one. I think this is probably my biggest recommendation for anyone that wants to learn what's going on in the space, but in a very fun way that's digestible. And it's my friend Jonah's. He works at a company as well. It's called What's Drippin'. Jonah has this What's Drippin' newsletter that essentially covers 2 topics per week every Monday, and he inserts memes in there. It's kind of like Morning Brew, actually. It's very lighthearted, very easy to read. He includes memes. He'll be like joke around or whatever. It's very conversational. You really connect with Jonah, and so that's another one that I would highly recommend you subscribe to. If anything, it would probably be What's Drippin' for the most basic, most digestible, most fun way to absorb all this information.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for your time. I mean,
Thanks
this has been an amazing interview. Love getting to meet you and learn more about security tokens. Before we wrap up, just blanket disclaimer, none of this is financial advice. That's
correct.
Not what we do here. We are purely educational, informative, facts on the crypto industry. But Jason, thanks for sharing so much wisdom.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate you guys, and you guys are killing it with Candid Crypto. Happy to continue listening to you guys and whatnot, and hopefully we can reconnect soon and whatnot. But this is fantastic. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode and are excited for season 2 of Candid Crypto, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as all your favorite podcasting platforms to stay updated with all our content. In addition, go to candidcrypto.cc to access the rest of our amazing content.